Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out in the coldish weather. It's not as cold, right? It got a little bit, it's not like, usually when you leave, it like hurts your face. It's not hurting your face. That's a good sign for New York. Okay, so a lot to discuss tonight. We're going to talk about questions. We're going to talk about a little bit of plagues. We're going to throw in the children as well, literally into the mix. But first of all, we'll talk about a very unusual statement in the Haggadah. Of course, the Haggadah is mentioned actually in the Parshat. Haggadah is one of the two Torah mitzvot we have on Pesach. There are two mitzvot, min Torah, that we have on Pesach. One of them is to eat matzah, very good. And the other Torah mitzvah we have on Pesach is to Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, to tell the story of leaving Egypt. That became, at some point, what we call the Haggadah. The word Haggadah means lahagit, to say over, and it's based upon a word in the Parsha, Vehigarta lebincha. You got to talk to your kids. Why are you talking to your kids? Or actually, any kids. Or actually, we're going to see tonight, anyone who's younger than you classifies as a child in this case. Why we're going to talk to them specifically, unlike any other holiday, where we're not told specifically to talk to our kids, but when it comes to Pesach, we are told to talk to our children. We're going to discuss that a little bit later, and the mitzvah of talking to our kids. However, there's another aspect the Haggadah mentions to us. And the Haggadah tells us that everyone has to see themselves as though they left Egypt. A very famous statement of the Haggadah. Chayv Adam, lirot et atzmo, to see themselves as though they left Egypt. So this story we're reading right now of the Jewish people getting into Egypt, getting stuck in Egypt, spending hundreds of years over there, the 10 plagues, that's going to make up the bulk of our discussion of Pesach, but it's actually a daily mitzvah to remember that God took us out of Egypt. It's one of the few mitzvot that we have on a daily basis just to remember it. Now, once a year, we make a whole big deal out of it, right? We have the Pesach Seder, we drink cups of wine, matzah, maror, we lean, we schlep our family, right, to the table. You know, we shake off our grandparents from Florida and schlep them up, or maybe we go down to visit them, whichever the way it is. And it becomes the mitzvah of the day. But this particular one is very unusual. What does that mean? You have to see yourself as though you left Egypt. What exactly am I meant to do? How do I fulfill this particular mitzvah, even at the Pesach Seder? What exactly does the Torah say I'm meant to be doing? Am I meant to recreate the plagues? Do I have to get dressed up as Pharaoh, which actually I do every single year? I have a whole Pharaoh outfit, right? I run a big explanatory Seder at my program, and I'm schlepping out, and people carry the matzah. Is that what a person is actually expected to do? Or is it a mental mitzvah? So the Rambam answers, and when he describes this idea that a person has to see themselves, ki'ilu hu yatsa Mitzrayim, that it's as though you left Egypt, he adds an extra letter. Do you know what letter he adds to that verse? Chayv Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa Mitzrayim. A person has to see themselves as though they left Egypt. He takes the word lirot and he adds a letter hey. So it's not lirot, it's laharot. What's the difference between lirot and laharot?
See and show.
Very good. Lirot is to see something. Laharot is to display, to show yourself. Laharot. So what does that mean? Laharot et atzmo. You have to act it out. You have to go through the process of doing what they did. They ate maror, we eat maror. They ate the korban pesach, well, we don't do that nowadays. Right? But we have the matzah, and we look at the shank bone, right, in order to represent it. And we lean because we're free people, because they left, right? And they were free people. So the Rambam says that by doing that, you are showing, you're displaying. It's a display. Pesach Seder is a display of action. That's one answer to this question. Rashi gives, we're going to look at about 4 or 5 answers to this very important question. Rashi says that you could see yourself as though you left Egypt because although you didn't leave Egypt, your ancestors did. And had they not got out, you would still be there. So it's as though you got out. That's Rashi. So we have the Rambam who says, don't see yourself, it's display, show yourself as though you left, act it out. And by the way, people do that. People have different customs, you know what I'm saying? They get dressed up. In many families, they take an onion. Have you seen this? A scallion? And they beat each other with it. Have you seen that? Persians do that. Jessica, you do that in your family? You don't do that. You don't do that, right? You do that, right? You do that, right? What is this beat each other with onions all about? I didn't know the answer to this. Although I grew up with being the youngest child of the Pesach Seder, I got a good beating and plenty of green stripes on my beautiful white Pesach shirt. The answer is because the Jewish people complained in the desert about a number of things. In the Torah, in Parshat Bahalotcha, it tells us. They said, wow, Moshe Rabbeinu, back in Egypt we had watermelons, avatichim, we had garlic, we had shum, we had meat, basar, we had fish, and we had batzal, onions. So you want to complain that you don't have onions? We take an onion as if to say, here, you want it? Take it. It's also to remember the beating. That's actually the reason why. It's also the whipping, but that's why with an onion. I mean, they could use a watermelon, but you'd probably kill your grandmother if you hit her with a watermelon. Funny, though, it would probably be at the Pesach Seder. Not such a good idea. It's actually in practice. So that's really where it comes from. So all of that and the other customs, I think, what do the Syrians put the mats on their back, and some people jump over water, right? You step over water and do that kind of thing. Underwater, you do stuff like that as well. You carry it, you say it in Arabic. All of this is ancient traditions. What? Not everyone does that. We don't do that. And he answers questions in Arabic. Where you going, right? Answer. There you go. So all of this is founded upon the idea of see yourself as though you left Egypt. So that's the Rambam. Rashi, they left, that's why you left. I want to share with you a wild idea from another one of the comments. I want to look at a few more answers, but Rav Schwab says something amazing. And this answer has got major implications about who we are as a people. He says, if the Haggadah says, based upon the Parshat, that you have to see yourself as though you left Egypt, it means that you were there. I was never in Egypt. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I would be very interested to visit many parts of Egypt, right? And one day, God willing, I will. Maybe at a safer time for the Jewish people. But I've never been there. So why does he say that? So he says, if the fact you don't realize you're in Egypt means you don't understand what it means to be the Jewish people. This is this amazing, this is Rav Schwab. He was the rabbi in Washington Heights of KEJ. He came from Germany. Right? Many of the German Jews got out before the war. They saw it coming. The Polish Jews didn't see it coming. Right? But the German Jews did. They got out. So there's a whole German community. And he was a rabbi here in Manhattan of this very famous kehillah, this community KEJ. So he says in one of his books that he wrote in Hebrew and forbade anyone to translate it into English. So you can only read it in Hebrew, this book. There is no English translation of this book, but it's very simple Hebrew. He says like this. He says the Jewish people are like a human body. There's a birth, there's growing up to a teenager, then you're an adult, and then you're an old person. And then he says, let me ask you a question. Do you have any memory of being a 1 or 2 day old baby? No, most of us don't. If someone were to show you a photograph of you as a 1 or 2 day old baby, would you recognize yourself? No. It's only if your mother says, oh, that's you when you're 1 or 2. But there's no recollection of being it, but it's you. It doesn't look like you. It doesn't sound like you. It doesn't smell like you, I suppose. So how do you know it's you? Because someone told you it's you. On a genetic level, I guess if you took some genetic material and compared it to you, I guess you could actually prove that that was you as a baby. But that's about it. He says the Jewish people are the same thing. The fact you don't remember being in Egypt is fine. You don't remember being a baby either. That was our birth. The Jewish people in Egypt were us as babies. It's not different people, because the Jewish people are ish echad b'lev echad. We're one nation, as the Torah tells us, right? In the Torah, we're one being. We just don't remember leaving Egypt because it was too early in our beginnings. But so he's saying the Jewish people are not various people spread out through generations who have similar genealogy. We are one people who span all of history, literally one body that happens to spread out. That's how he defines it. So when it says, see yourself as though you left, he's like, yeah, try to remember, because as a collective whole, as a nation, we left. And we're still part of the same nation. So it's as though we ourselves left Mitzrayim. That's how he understands it. It's a very beautiful idea. And then he goes actually to say, but the other nations are not like that. There is no continuity between the people now and then. And that's why when the Jewish people went into Egypt, there were how many Jewish people went into Egypt? 70. How does it describe? Shivim nefesh. 70, what's nefesh? Soul. What should it say? Shivim nefashot. It should be the plural. It doesn't say that. It's in the singular because we're one person. 70 of us, but it's one person. So 70 might as well be 5,000 or 1 million, 2 million. It's all one being. So if you look at our history, it just starts at one point, but it's one organic being, right, that takes on different pieces, just like a body is made up of many, many cells, but it's one body. And each cell has a different function. You've got the cells that make up the toe, and the cells that make up the eye, and the cells that make up the brain, but they're all cells, but they're in one body. That's how Rav Schwab sees us. So when it says you left, it literally means you left. That's you. You don't remember it? No problem. As he says, you don't remember being a baby either. So that's completely okay. A wild idea from a wild Jewish thinker is how to describe that. So that's him. So we've had Rambam, we've had Rashi, we've had Rav Schwab. We're jumping around history a little bit. Let's come back to one of the most recent rabbis that I saw an answer from. There's many, many answers to this question. And this is actually one of my mentors and role models. He was a rabbi and a psychiatrist, a doctor, went to medical school. And he was very involved in addictions. I hope you've heard of him. Rabbi Dr. Abraham Tersi. I'm sure most people have heard of him. I hope so. He wrote tons of books, Jewish books, medical books, addiction books, you name it, he wrote about it. He blends them all together. So he actually has a book on the Haggadah, and I read this many years ago, and he says that the imagination that a person has is extremely powerful, and he doesn't use this word, but it's become a very popular word nowadays, but the idea he talks about of manifesting, I'm talking about every video, right? You've got to manifest. He was very into that. And he says the power of your imagination is extremely powerful, and by imagining something, you can make it be. And it's as though you are there. So he says this mitzvah of see yourself as though you left Egypt actually really occurs at the Pesach Seder from all the sounds, the sights, and the smells that you experience at the Pesach Seder. And when you go through that experience, right, and you go through it, and I think back to my childhood, although we spent many childhood Pesachs about hotels, even as children we used to do that. Actually, that's where I learned how to do a communal Seder. I remember being like 8 or 9 years old. There was a rabbi doing a communal Seder, one of the hotels we were at, and I was like, that is the coolest thing I've had in my entire life. I just remember it, and I've been doing communal Seders for the past 17 years now. Yeah? So you go to but there's nothing beats like Pesach at home. Nothing beats Pesach. That's the honest truth. Right? Besides the cleaning, which is tough, yeah? Just being there and smelling and being with your grandparents. I have very, very fond memories as a young boy having Pesach at home, and I remember my grandmother and my grandfather a little bit, and I remember being part of that process, and you know, the smells of the foods and the matzah and the charoset, yep, that taste and that smell, you know, the wine and the apples and the cinnamon, that takes me right back to my childhood. They say actually the most sensitive sense, which is connected to memory, is the sense of smell, the olfactory system. When you smell it, you go right back. So that smell to this day of, what's it called? Charoset, chalich, I smell it, I've gone straight back. Such an unusual mixture of nuts and wine and apples and so I just smell that, I go right back. It really connects you. There's something to that, he says. And when you take in that smell, those flavors, you're transported back but you're also transported back in time to previous generations. But you have to imagine it. You got to close, and you have to imagine that you're being beaten by when you read those words, and you have to imagine that you are being freed slowly, and you have the wine, drinking the wine helps. You get a little high, you know, and you do that, and you feel, and by the end of the Pesach Seder, you should be elated. You have to feel as though you left. And he says, if you don't feel it, you didn't imagine it enough. That's how he describes this mitzvah of imagining, using all the tools that you have, and the singing and the food and the smells and the grandparents and stories about their grandparents, telling them, you've got, basically, if you sit with your grandparents, you can go back 6, 7 generations. It's pretty cool. Right? That's a very, very powerful thing to do. So that's Rashi, that's Rambam, Rav Schwab, and Rabbi Tersi. And there's many more answers to how you're meant to see yourself as though you left Egypt. Okay, so leave that one aside. Let's go back, talk about kids. Because there's this weird thing when it comes to Pesach, and I don't think there's any other area of Judaism where we see children being explicitly mentioned in the creation of Pesach Seder of a mitzvah. It's based upon a verse in the Parshat, V'higarata lebincha. Talk to your kids about this story. It doesn't say that on Sukkot. Nowhere does it say, take your kids on Sukkot, keep them up as late as possible, buy them gifts, right? Create a whole process of stealing the afikomen, right? And returning it, whether the parents steal it, the kids steal it. No, Rosh Hashanah, kids want to go to bed early, Gegezun. Yom Kippur, you want to go to bed early, no problem. Pesach, no. You've got to keep them up. And Rabbi Akiva says, listen to this. This is in the Gemara. Rabbi Akiva used to hand out nuts to the kids as a reward for staying up. Imagine trying that now. You want to give your kids nuts to stay up, they'll think you're nuts, right? I want an Xbox, I want a PlayStation, right? I want, a vacation. Things have changed. In his day, it was a little bit of an egozim that did the job. In our day, it's a lot more. But the idea is still the same. Children are still children. They need to be encouraged in order to stay up. And actually, this whole story that we're talking about, these parashiot, and the Pesach Seder, you're actually meant to talk to the kids. I went to, I remember when I was a single guy, I used to go to many rabbis for Jewish holidays. I'm sure you've all done this as well. And I used to go to the head of my yeshiva. He would always invite me, and I would sit next to him, or I would not sit next to him. I would sit at his Pesach Seder table. And he used to have all the guests. Usually he would put the guests next to him on a regular Shabbat. At the Pesach Seder, I'll never forget this, he put his kids, his youngest child, whose name was Yehuda Hanania, right next to him, and he would talk to him the entire night. He would talk to us too, but he was like, Yehuda Hanania, and he would talk to him, and always engage him as a child. Why? Didn't do it on a regular Shabbat. Regular Shabbat, he spoke to us, spoke to his wife. On that Pesach night, him and his wife posed questions and took answers specifically from the youngest child. Not just the manishtana, right? Which I have PTSD because I was the youngest child, had to stand on the table and talk to 40 people and sing manishtana. I still, have never recovered from that. It was wonderful, don't worry. But not just that, every part of the Pesach Seder, why? Why are we picking on kids? Why do kids become the focal point of the Pesach Seder? Okay? So in order to answer that, we're going to have to meet 4 children who actually appear very early on in the Haggadah. Haggadah, we said, is lahagit, to tell over, to speak, which we said already, the mitzvah of saying Haggadah is a Torah mitzvah, one of the 2 Torah mitzvot of the Pesach Seder. So who are these 4 children that we speak about? Who are they? And what have they got to do with it? And why are we trying to find our kids in the mix? That's what we're trying to do. So who is the first child? The Chacham, the wise child. The wise child. It's interesting, by the way, the wise child, the Chacham, what's his position when it comes to the Haggadah? Where is he located? What's he doing? Does he have answers? He has questions. Right? He has questions. Manishtan la zot, right? And he wants to know, what are we doing over here? Why are you doing this mitzvot? It's interesting. Wisdom, chokhmah, in Judaism, is not answers. Right? That's a teshuvah. He asks questions. But he's the wise kid. Should he know the answers? No. Wisdom is not knowing the answers. Wisdom is wanting, that's da'at. Da'at is knowing answers. Wisdom is asking questions because I want to know more. That's why the word for wisdom in Hebrew is chokhmah. Chokhmah. If you take the word chokhmah and divide it into 2 words and flip around, it becomes koach ma. The power of what? The word wisdom in Hebrew is two words, koach ma, the power of what? The power of asking questions. That's how you become wise. Smart, dat, you can just go onto AI nowadays, right? Or just go to Google and you ask any question you want. You'll get an answer. But that's not wisdom, right? Wisdom is understanding at a deeper level what's right for this particular person to know right now. And the only way to get wisdom is to ask questions. So the wisest of these four kids ask questions. Okay, who's next? The Rasha. The Rasha. Now, when I was a kid, we used to use this old German, I lived in England, these old German Haggadot. Right? We didn't used to have the Maxwell Haggadah that you guys probably chilled with as a kid. You had these old Haggadot, and you used to have drawings of these old characters. These are probably like old etchings they used to put, that they printed. And the wise kid was sitting there, smart, in like a suit, three-piece suit, and a cane. I don't know what he was doing, right? And the Rasha was like, a bum. He's a bum. And now he's thought he's the worst. I'm going to prove to you he's not the worst of the four, because we're actually going down in order. So after the Chacham comes the Rasha. Now the Rasha also asks a question. And by the way, these questions, three of these four questions are actually, three of these four kids are actually loaded in this week's parasha. So this one is the kid who asked the question, but his question is not to acquire wisdom. He's asking a cynical question. So he's cynical. I always say, asking a question is good. Being skeptical is also good. That's a great thing. Being skeptical is a good thing. But being cynical means being dismissive and asking because I want to ask and I don't care about the answer. It's all about me asking. Those people who just ask questions, not because they want to know the answer, right? They want to hear that you should know, that they dismiss what you believe. That's him. So his question is, what are we doing over here? Right? This is so antiquated. That's the Rasha. He doesn't have any patience to even hear or care about an answer. So he has a question, but his comes cynically. And even we answer, or her, actually. Okay, what comes after that? The Tam, the simple kid. Does he have a question? Yeah, but his question is really simple. Mazot, what is this? It's just a very simple kid. Right? He's a bit of a nebuch, and if you see him depicted nowadays in the Haggadot, of which there's now you can buy 5,000 different Haggadah. Every rabbi has to bring out their own Haggadah, right? There you just see him as like a simple kid with a question mark above his head. He's a simple person. I'll explain to you in a minute how he ended up becoming so simple. This is not just what these kids are. We're actually being shown how they got to this point in life. And then we answer him as well. But how do we answer him? Well, he's a simple kid. How do you answer simple kids? Simple answers. This is matzah. We eat it. This is wine. We drink it. Because your answer, right? We pretty much answer him like a simple person. By the way, it doesn't have to be a child. There's many adults who unfortunately know very little about Judaism as well. Yeah? And you have to break it down to the basics. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with it. He's not a bad person. He's just simple. Simply didn't get a good Jewish education. That's the end of it. Why? I'll show you in a moment. Last comes the Eno Yodeh L'Shol. That is the worst scenario. This kid doesn't even know there are questions to be asked. But even that person, that Jewish person, deserves an answer. And so we formulate a question for the kid, we feed it to him like a script, and then we answer it for him as well. Right? So even that kid is still within the... So there's a very famous idea which has to be mentioned because it's probably the most famous when it comes to this idea. We see these four kids and we always wonder where there's a fifth kid. Who's the fifth kid? Who's the fifth son? Who's the fifth child? Well, they're not there at the Pesach Seder. Why is there no fifth child at the Pesach Seder? We only have four kids. Where's the fifth one? I'll show you. It goes like this. These four children are actually four generations. A great-grandfather or grandmother, you could just, put it in yourself. Grandfather, father, and son. Actually, four generations. So the great-grandfather, as most Jewish people today, even the most secular Jewish person who identifies as Jewish, what was your great-grandfather like? Always a rabbi. Everyone's great-grandfather, he was a rabbi in Morocco, in Yemen, right? My great-grandmother was a tzaddiket. She would say Tehillim all day. Everyone's got the same thing. Walk into any kosher store, restaurant. Right? There's always some guy there with greased back hair, with a yarmulke, like perch on top. And you're like, is this place kosher? And he always points on the wall, and there's like a painting or a photograph of some old rabbi. He's like, this was my great-grandfather. I'm like, yeah, if he was serving me the shawarma and you're up on the wall, I'd probably eat here. But this way around, I'm not so sure. Everyone's great-grandfather, great-grandmother, he was the biggest rabbi in Syria, in Morocco, in Poland, everyone. By the way, they're not even joking. They were. By definition, I'm going to prove to you, if they identify as Jewish, they had to have had at least one great-grandparent who was very, very connected to their Judaism in a very real way. Has to be. I'll prove to you. Because if they weren't, you would not identify as Jewish right now, because there is a 4-generational lag of Judaism that goes through. I'll show you. So that great-grandfather, what happened to his son? What happened to his daughter, his son? So it could well be, not always, that kid rebels. Oh, you're so old, right? They came to America. Right? They came as religious people. And the kids were like, we're in the new country. We don't need this. Right? This is the new world. And they rebelled. They're the Rasha. But they remember their parents. But they're rebelling against their parent. Right? We all rebelled against our parents at some point. So they rebel against their parent. So now you've got that generation. Now they have a child. What's that child? That child remembers their grandparent. Because we all pretty much remember, maybe we're lucky enough to have a living grandparent, but everyone met pretty much their grandparent. Everyone met their grandparent. So they are connected. So they remember the grandparent who is the chacham. But their parent rebelled against it. So they have something, but not enough. They're the tam. They're the simple kid. They remember, what's this? Oh, I remember. You always hear this from secular people. I remember my grandfather used to wear tefillin. My grandmother used to light lights. My parents don't do that, right? They lost it. But I remember it. It's still within their collective family memory reality. Because it's only a grandparent, because it's 4 generations. Let's say they don't turn it around, and it just keeps declining. Then you end up with their child being one who doesn't know there's questions even to be asked. Because most of us don't remember our great-grandparents. That's too far. I remember my grandparent. I remember my father. But my great-grandparent, that's out of it. So he had to listen to his grandfather or her grandmother talk about their parent. Oh, I remember back, my grandfather used to do this. So the grandparents will tell you stories about a previous generation. But you don't have direct contact with that person. So now it's gone. Where's it gone? Their child. That's the 5th child we spoke about. The 5th child is so disconnected from definitely from their grandparent, because their grandparent is the top. There's nothing there. Right? Their father entered the Lishol. The great-grandfather, forget about it. Once you hit the 5th generation, you're done. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said very famously that the 5th son is not at the table. So what do? You have to go and find those Jews in Alabama, in China, in, Kentucky, in Paris, right? Wherever they are in London, and you've got to bring them to the Pesach Seder table. The 5th son is not at the table because they've gone through that 4-generational lag and they've now completely disconnected from their Judaism. So what you have to do is, number 1, turn the grandchild and the great-grandchild into a chacham. So the 4-generational thing starts again. Then you've got a chance of at least another 4 generations. Every generation has to become wise. But it's all like, it's a cyclical effect that is moving on. But once you hit the 5th son, he ain't there. So that's why he started a whole outreach movement. Let's schlep around the world. Let's send rabbis, right, throughout the world and their rebbitzins to go and bring these 5th sons on the streets and bring them to the synagogue. And they became hugely successful. He created an entire movement that we see every year, seems to grow and grow and grow. And that's what, that's what every rabbi should be doing. That's what every synagogue should be doing. That's what every yeshiva should be doing. Should be trying to get the 5th kid and try to pull them in. Okay, there are movements of Judaism who doesn't care. They're just trying to, consolidate and hunker down in order to keep those inside wise, right? They're following the same pattern. Let's not just try to avoid a decline by keeping everyone wise. But the 5th son, we'll leave that to the other people. Nowadays, it doesn't work. You have to go get them. You have to go get them. That's just the way it is. everyone needs to be involved somehow in pulling in those people who became the fifth son. That is the famous idea of the Lubavitch Rebbe when it comes to these Arba Banim, these 4 children. Okay? All right. Any questions? Anything we said so far? Yeah?
So can the fifth son also be thought of as the neshamot who have been born into non-Jewish bodies as well?
Oh my goodness. You've opened up a whole galavish. Can these fifth son be considered to be people born into non-Jewish bodies? Okay.
A Jewish neshamot, like a Jewish.
Well, that's a good question. Does a Jewish neshama get into a non-Jewish body? According to some people, they can, actually. And all future converts are proof they're actually Jewish souls in non-Jewish bodies. And I've mentioned it before many times. That's why they say after the Holocaust, right? The Klosenberger Rebbe made a big deal. I spoke about it on Shabbat, actually, upstairs. He says that that's who we're really trying to get, is these young children that died during the Holocaust, come back in non-Jewish bodies. We have to get them back. We don't proselytize, but we make ourselves available. That could be. But really, we're talking about the kids who have, dissipated and left their roots and have ended up not become part of their people anymore. Okay? All right. So that was that. That's this. Something else I want to discuss with you. Okay. We also, so why kids? So we are trying, obviously, to keep our kids affiliated and connected as much as possible. We want to make our kids into the wise child. And so the most important lesson, Jewishly, we can teach our kids is that you're the next generation. It's like Elie Wiesel said about the Holocaust. What's the Holocaust Memorial Day, right? He said the most important thing about Holocaust education, let's just use that as a metaphor for this, is the next generation. Because if you don't pass on the next generational information, it's going to be lost. So he said the key about the Holocaust is so it happens to be true about Judaism in general. If you don't figure out how to keep the next generation activated and alive and connected, which is probably why we schlep a grandparents to the Pesach Seder table and try to make it a family event, and it is a family event, then you're wasting your entire time. And that's also very, very important. You see a very interesting hint to this. See a very interesting hint to this in the conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and Pharaoh. And what's that? And Paro, what's that? So Moshe Rabbeinu says, we have to leave for a few days in order to worship our God. He says, who's going to go? So he says, well, our men and our women and our children and our babies, the Tapchem as well. And Pharaoh's like, what are you talking about? The Gevarim can go, the men can go. But you're not taking any women or children. And the answer is, why not? What's he concerned about? Or what's his question? So, on the surface, you think, well, if he lets the wife and kids go, they won't come back. But he held back their cattle. So that could have been enough collateral for them to want to actually come back. And he also threatens, if you don't come back, we're going to bring you back, which he actually tried to do. But I read something fascinating recently, that actually it wasn't just a situation of don't take them because you won't come. It was actually don't take them because why would you take them? What are you doing when you go? We're going to worship our God. Pharaoh was like, why do you need your wife and kids to worship God? It always was that when it came to Avodah Zarah and any form of worship, it was basically an adult male activity. They ran it all. The women and kids had nothing to do with it. They weren't part of the process of spirituality. I know it sounds weird to you now, right? Because what are you talking about? Yeah, it was a male-dominated reality for thousands of years. Come along Moshe Rabbeinu, and he says to Paro, no, I think you're misunderstanding. It's all about the family. So what did he do? He brought a Korban Pesach. What's a Korban Pesach? The Paschal lamb. They brought this lamb, which, by the way, as a side point, the Egyptians used to worship. They worshiped the sheep. What did we do to their god? We caught it, kept it for 3 days to make sure that it was pure, killed it, took the blood, sprinkled it on the door frame, and then we ate it. We ate their god. We had God burger. Actually, not God burger. It was actually God on the shpud, on the spit. It had to be complete. You couldn't break the bones. You couldn't mix it up. Everyone had to know you're eating their gods. Right? One of the great miracles was that they saw us doing that, and they weren't allowed to attack us. That's why you have the special holiday of Shabbat HaGadol is actually to commemorate that miracle. They weren't able to attack us. Who comes to that meal? Is that just the males? Like everyone's going to stay home. You can have leftover pizza from last night. No. Who's there? It's a family meal. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to them, I think you're misunderstanding. When it comes to worshiping the true God of Israel, it's not you just turn up and just bring the males with you and have a nice party, all right, and then you come back the next morning and like, hey, how was worship? How was Avodah Zarah? For us, it's a family thing. So every single Pesach Seder, from the very first one to this one, it's always family. It's always talking to kids. This was something that Egypt could not figure out. Pharaoh could not understand this concept that kids, wives, daughters, sons are an integral part of our worshipping, of our connection to the God of Israel. He wants everyone involved. Everyone involved. There's many stories you can tell about. There's one famous story of a woman who went to see, it's said in the name of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. I'm not sure, but if you read his writings, it kind of fits into his style, so it probably was him. And she went up to him, and she said, listen, I want to know when to start educating my child in Jewish knowledge. And he said, well, how old is your child? He said, my child is 5 years old. And suppose he jumped up and said, you're 5 years too late. It starts at ground zero. At ground zero. Okay, they're not obligated in mitzvah because they're below bar or bat mitzvah. That's not the point. There's still an osmosis that needs to be taken in. There's a very famous story in the Gemara. I think it may have been Bruria who brought her child to the Bet Knesset and the Bet Midrash, a baby. And they would say, well, what are you doing over here? Why are you bringing the baby in? She says, because my child's going to learn. Your child's learn. It's like, I don't know, it's a 2-month-old. It's still hearing it. Its soul understands and it's accepting the information. It's being downloaded without you even realizing. Just the atmosphere itself. So it's not a matter of smart kids understanding Torah. The Torah is not given to smart people, not just for adults, it's for everyone at their level. Depends which son you are, where you are in life, but it's all going to be downloaded. So we always see children. I mentioned actually this week, I spoke about this. I said that's why the most important role in the synagogue is the someone's got to say it. Candyman. You want to say the rabbi, right? Candyman is the right answer. The Candyman is the greatest mitzvah. My father, should live and be well, I mentioned this week, actually is the Candyman. And you need a backup Candyman as well. Second in command. So when he's away, someone takes over. The Chazon Ish was asked, if he wasn't the great rabbi that he was, what job would he have done? And he thought about it and said, I'd be the Candyman in synagogue. Beautiful, right? He says, that's what it's all about. It's all about next generation. That's the key. Passing on the Masorah. And that's why I know it's difficult. And I know I'm a rabbi of a synagogue, part-time as well. And kids come in, they make noise, but that's what we're there for. And it's annoying and frustrating, and you want to pray, and you can hear babies crying and stuff. But that's just part of who we are. They're part of the process. On Pesach, we double down on that, and we make them the focal point of the Pesach Seder. We talk to them, we address them, we force them to ask questions, because that's how you build wisdom, by making them ask questions. Questions are the foundation of wisdom. Okay? So that's the key over here. Getting them involved, engaging them, and talking to them as well. Okay? Which takes us to our final topic. Well, actually, we've run out of time over here. How long do we have? Okay, there's no second class. Give me another few minutes? Okay, great. I did start late, you're right. Okay. Okay, great. Okay. So I want to talk to you because we do find in the Parsha 3 of the final plagues. Plague 8, 9, and 10. And that completes the series of 10 plagues. By the way to remember that is the Parsha is called Bo. Bet, Aleph, which is 2 and 1, which is 3. So last week's Ve'era is 7 plagues, and this week's the last 3. Ba means to come, right? And that's the 3 plagues that appear in the Parsha. So the 3 plagues, these 3 are really the big ones because they got progressively more difficult and challenging. And you end up, it was these 3 that broke the back of Pharaoh and the Egyptian. This was the one that Paro just knocked him out. I want to just look at all 10 of them with a little bit of a different light, so the last 3 will make a lot more sense as to why they're so big. So the 10 plagues are divided up into 4 groupings: 3, 3, 3, and 1. Okay? So the first 3 are blood, frogs, and lice. These 3 represent what they have something in common. By the way, most of the plagues, not all of them, started with a few-week warning and then 1 week of plague. So all 10 plagues together took almost a year. It was like a university program for the Egyptians and for the Jewish people and for the people in other nations that heard about them. To this day, everyone knows about the 10 plagues. Okay, truthfully, the movie The 10 Commandments did help, right? This endeavor. Everyone sees that, right? Right, around Easter, which happens to fall around Pesach time, right? So it was like, Moses. That was my, Jewish education of the 10 plagues. There's a lot more to it. So most of them came with warnings, but not all of them. So the first 3, which are blood and frogs, actually, Sephardim, some say, the Sephardim says it wasn't frogs, it was crocodiles. It puts a whole new twist on it, doesn't it? Or alligators. He says one of the 2. Right? He actually uses the word itself. It changes the frog thing to something a bit more nefarious, I think. Having one of those in your bed with you. A frog in your bed is pretty gross. A crocodile alligator is a bit more, okay, fine. So those 3 come from the earth, the water, and the dust of the earth. The lice came out of the dust of the earth. So that shows that God is in control of the earth itself, the liquid and the lice, that's the earth itself. That's those 3. And the first 2 came with a 3-week warning. The second grouping, and by the way, you see in the Haggadah, they actually do divide it up this way. And actually, Pharaoh's staff had the letters of the 10 plagues etched into these 3 groupings: 3, 3, 3, and 1. Okay? The 4th, 5th, and 6th are wild animals, the death of the wild animals, the epidemic, and boils. What does that affect? Creatures on the earth, animals and humans. So you've gone from earth to those things that are on the earth. So God is like, I'm in control of the earth. And there's people who believe that God controls the earth. He doesn't control what's on the earth. He's like, I'm in control of that as well. I control all of living creatures on the earth as well, whether in the form of animals or humans. What's the next grouping? We have hail, barad, arba, and choshech. Right? That's hail and locusts and darkness. Those 3 come from the heavens, the sky. Locusts come as a swarm down onto the earth. I think recently there was a locust swarm that came in recently, in the past couple of years actually, into Egypt. My father-in-law is Israeli, was born in Israel, or Palestine as it was then referred to. Yes, he was a Jewish Palestinian because the original Palestinians were actually Jewish. So he says that he remembers there was a swarm that came in when he was a young man, and he saw that there was a Yemenite Jew who lived next to him. He saw this locust, this grasshopper, it's a form of grasshopper. He picked it up, he checked the signs on it, and it's like, oh, and took a bite. It's kosher. It's the only insect that is actually, the chagav, that is actually kosher. So it's actually a food. Right? By the way, as a side point, is it milky, is it chalav, or is it basar? Parv. It's parv. Trick question. It's parv. And you don't have to, it's a cold-blooded animal, I think, so you don't have to shecht it. You can just eat it as is if you want to. I know it sounds gross to you. That's because you're not used to it. But in Yemen and other such countries where they have a mesorah of how to identify, although nowadays everyone's pretty much able to identify it. Right? We have enough technology and understanding. So I know Ashkenazim who actually eat them as well now. Okay? As a side point. So those 3, hail and locust and darkness, come from above, below. So now God's like, I'm in control of the heavens as well. The last, obviously, is the worst of all of them, and that is makat bechorot, death of the firstborn. Now that was really bad for Pharaoh because he was a firstborn. Actually, here's a good trick question for you. How many firstborns are in every family? Now you're thinking, right? Thinking this rabbi is tricking you.
No, it used to be 0. 1 or 0.
Well, assuming they have children.
I'm going to say the girl would choose.
Firstborn.
Depends on how many wives they have.
So the answer actually does not go on the wives, it goes on the husbands. says that every house had many firstborn children. How could that be? It's just one man, one woman. And the answer is because one woman actually in Egypt, right, would have relations with many. So it's actually the firstborn of many different men via her. You can actually end up with many firstborn. So this firstborn didn't just affect one person in the family. It could be 4 or 5 kids. Because she had a firstborn from that man, and that man, and that man, and that man. There was no Kedusha in those days. It wasn't like, a nice Jewish family. You know what I'm saying? It was the Egyptians, and they didn't care. So obviously Pharaoh freaks out because he was one of those firstborns to his mother. So he actually, as was quite understandable, freaked out at the idea of this idea. So what does he do? So he turns around, and this is actually we'll finish with this idea. Pharaoh freaks out. He's like, I'm a firstborn, I'm going to die. And when was this plague meant to hit? This was the last night we were in Egypt. When was it meant to hit? At midnight. Pharaoh says to him, at midnight, there's going to be this final plague of Makat Bechorot, of the strike down of the firstborn, which was a direct threat at Pharaoh. So this freaks him out. So what does he do? He goes out. As children, I don't know if you went through this, but in yeshiva, what do the kids sing? Paro in the middle of the night in pajamas. Right? Paro in the middle of the night in pajamas. That's what we sing. So it's actually not so wrong. He actually went out and realized that he had to get the Jews out of there very, very quickly. I want to focus, though, on one extra letter in that discussion. And you've got to check this out, and you're going to learn a lot about Egypt from this one extra letter. This plague was meant to kick in at Chatzot Halayla, which basically means midnight. When Moshe Rabbeinu warns the people it's going to come, what does he say? Chatzot Halayla. Around midnight, that's when it's going to happen. What do you mean around midnight? Hashem said to him, at midnight it's going to come. Why did he add a Chatzot around midnight? Anyone know the answer to that question? Very famous question. Rashi asks and answers it. How does Rashi ask and answer that question?
In case people doubt him.
How would they doubt him?
If he were to say it's at midnight.
If he says it's at midnight. And they were mistaken, according to they didn't have watches, right? They were basing their time upon, other forms of understanding time. They could turn around and be like, oh, you said at midnight, but they didn't all die at midnight. And therefore, he said around midnight, not because it was going to happen at midnight, because God says it's going to happen at midnight, but the people who are meant to be affected by this, they're going to turn around and be like, oh, you said midnight. Do you know how crazy? Just think about that for a second. I want you to imagine that their clocks or their timepieces, or their watch, whatever it was, is off by a minute. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, every single firstborn is going to drop dead at midnight. And they're like, waiting midnight. Midnight's come and gone. It hasn't because they got the wrong time. And it's now 12:01 or 11:59 according to the wrong watches. And they drop dead at that moment. They're going to turn around and be like, oh, Moshe Rabbeinu, we don't believe you. It's not midnight. It's actually 12:01. Do you know how in denial you have to be? Maybe that's why the denial is in Egypt. Do you know how in denial you have to be that, oh, you said at midnight and it happened at 12:02? I don't believe you. That is how bad the Egyptians were. You have a beautiful insight to how they needed to have these plagues in order to break down. Even this last plague could have been, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to say around midnight, because you're going to have the wrong time. And if you have the wrong time, you'll be off by a minute. You're not going to believe anything I'm going to tell you. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood what these people were like. They were so thick-headed. They were so intransient. I don't know how else to describe them. Give me another way to describe them. They were so off when it came to appreciating the truth. They were so full of sheker that you could show them the truth again, and they were shown again and again and again and again, 10 plagues, and they still couldn't download the fact that they were wrong. That is what the Jewish people were living with for hundreds of years. Right? That obstinate nation, most obstinate, unhumble, gava, egoistic nation that existed in the world, they say. Egypt was the most depraved place in the entire world. Right? Literally the most. Someone came into this week, they're like, where the Jewish people lived in Egypt, it must have been like Bnei Barak. I promise you, it was not Brooklyn, it was not Bnei Brak, it was San Francisco times 1,000 and North Korea rolled into one because no one could get out. If you want to have a clear example, as a kid, no one can leave Egypt. I'm like, how could no one leave a country? North Korea, with all the technology and everything, people can't live there either. It's the same thing that they cracked down, everyone had to stay. Getting in was difficult, but getting out was difficult as well. It was the most difficult thing. And the Jewish people didn't have their own little enclave. They were mixed up among the Mitzrayim. And we know that because when God killed the firstborn, what did he do? Pesach. Pesach means he had to jump over the homes of the Jewish people in order to go get the Mitzrayim. That means they lived among each other. The word Pesach also means Pesach, the mouth speaks. That's the mitzvah of the Haggadah, to speak it out. It's the same idea. That's how it was depraved. It was in a closed prison. You couldn't think what you wanted to think. It was very permissive when it comes to sexuality and depraved actions. It reached the lowest level of tumah, of impurity throughout the entire. By the way, the Jewish people were, Goshen was the worst of the worst, by the way. They were actually in the worst neighborhood. You should know that. The worst part of Egypt was Goshen. Why? That's a good question. But they had to live in the worst of the worst. And not only that, it was the most egoistic place in the entire world as well. They weren't able to accept the truth. And that's why they ended up chasing the Jewish people after all these 10 plagues and Makkah Bachorat, and they still went to schlep off in order to chase them into the sea. It's all part of the same disease, but after the sea, it was all done, and that we'll discuss in the upcoming weeks when we get to that part of the Torah. Okay, we'll stop over there. Thank you all very much for being part of this. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? Happy to take. Yeah.
So earlier, you were talking about really like way back, the idea of us being in Egypt and in each generation.
Yeah.
I might have missed because I came a little bit late.
Yeah.
But did you discuss the idea of just the Gilgulim aspect of it?
I did not mention that at all, no. It is part of it, but I did not mention that today. The idea of reincarnation are coming back in many, many times. No. It is part of it, though. It is part of it, but not of the Pesach Seder, it's not.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
We know of Hebrew women who were taken from their homes and they were forced to marry Egyptian
No.
men?
There was only one such case of a Jewish woman who was assaulted, violated, and raped. Right? And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, right, her husband, found out about it, and that was the Egyptian who started to beat up that Jew, comes along Moses, kills that Egyptian to save this Jewish person and buries him in the sand. That was the only case that we know of intermarriage. Well, it wasn't even intermarriage, it was against her will. Right? It's a very, very sad story. This Egyptian pretended. Besides that, they stayed pure. Having said that, when the Jewish people left, only 20% left, whatever that means. Probably different opinions exactly how many left, but the ones who stayed behind ended up assimilating. They ended up becoming part of the Egyptian society. A big chunk of Jews just never went out at all. Besides that, they stayed true and they stayed within their families. That's one of the reasons the Egyptians hated them. Didn't assimilate. All right. Have a great, successful week, everyone.